Welcome to another coding tutorial, and in today's video we're going to be making this bouncy and wavy animated typography. We're going to start by drawing a piece of text on the canvas. So first I'm going to declare a variable, let's call it t, and then t is going to be, instead of a string of text, I'm going to just have it as a letter A. And then inside draw, I'm going to use a function called text to draw the text on the canvas. The first argument is the piece of letter that we're going to draw, and then the second and the third are going to be the x and y coordinate of where we want to draw it. And this point is going to be the bottom left corner of the bounding box of the text itself. So how about we put it at the middle of the canvas, so width divided by 2 and height divided by 2. Alright, and then we're also going to be using a function called text size to change the size. And then I'm going to declare another variable called size. How about we set it to 20? Alright, and now if I draw an ellipse at the same location, width divided by 2 and height divided by 2, let's set the size to 10. You can see that it is at the bottom left corner of this bounding box, but I actually want it to be in the middle. Actually, I want to move the center of the bounding box to be in the middle of the canvas. So we can actually use a function called text align and then put the argument as center for the x direction and center for the y direction. And then now the bounding box of this piece of text is in the middle of the canvas. Let's say that we change the letter to a string of text. Now it is still in the middle. Alright, next what we're going to do is that instead of having a string of text stored in a variable called t, I actually want it to be stored in an array, and each position of the array will be storing each of the letter of the string of text. So we're going to declare another array called t array. And then inside setup, what we're going to do is that we're going to set t array to be equals to t.split. And split is a method within the string class that allows us to split a string of text into substrings and store it inside an array. And an argument that we need to put inside this method is the separator that we want to tell this method how to separate this piece of string. And because we want to separate each of the letters here, the argument that I'm going to put in is just an empty string. And if you do this and you print t array, now what we get is an array that stores each of the letter of the string t. Alright, now what we're going to do is, instead of drawing a text based on the string t, we're going to use a for loop. And this for loop is going to go from I equals to 0 to I less than t array dot length. So the length of the array t array, I plus plus. And then we're going to use the same function here, text. Instead of doing t, we're going to do t of array of I. And I'm going to delete this. And as you can see, all of the letters are clumped together in one position, and that is okay for now. We'll change it in a little bit. Next, we're going to be creating a total of two classes. One, I'm going to call it text, and then one, I'm going to call it wave. So first, I'm going to come to this arrow here, click the plus sign, and then click create file. And then let's start with text.js, and then one more. Let's call it wave.js. And then before we start writing these two classes, let's go to index.html and integrate these new JavaScript files. So come to this line of code, copy and paste, and then change the name here from sketch to your new file. So in my case, it's text.js and wave.js. And this is how we integrate new JavaScript files into the program. All right, so let's start with text. So we're going to write a class called text, and then inside the constructor function. So the text class basically is going to be drawing just one character. So just A in the apple, or P-P-L-E, right? So first we're going to be creating a total of 3 parameters called t, x, and y. And then I'm going to write a display method, and this display method basically is just going to be drawing the text, not the array of text, just one piece of letter. So what we want is setting the size, aligning the position, and then we're just going to be drawing this .t here at this .x and this .y position. That's it. But then inside the wave class, we're going to be creating text objects inside this class based on the string that we have. So the class is going to be called wave, and then inside the constructor function, it is going to also have t, but this t is going to be a string of text. And then we're going to also set the x position of where we want it to be. And then let's do this .t equals to t, and then this .x equals to x. All right, but inside here, we also need an array of text. So the same thing that we did previously. So t array will be equals to this .t .split, right? And then the argument that we're going to put in is an empty string. In addition to this, what we need is that we need to create a bunch of text objects. So I'm going to use the for loop that goes from I equals to 0 to I less than this .t array .length, right? So we're doing the exact same thing that we just did previously. And then now we're gonna create another object. Let's call it, how about wave? And this .wave of I will be equals to new text, right? And text requires 3 parameters here, t, x, and y. So what we're gonna put in here is going to be t array of I, right? Not t array, this .t array. And then what position are we going to put in? So for x, it's going to be, actually, we're going to put this .x here. So this .x, but then for y, I'm going to just put it at this .y, and let's set this .y to be equal to 0. So they're all going to be at the same position, which is fine for now. And then we're going to write another method called display, and use the same for loop to display the text objects. All right, just to make sure that this works, we're going to create this one wave object. So we don't need this. So let's create a variable called wave, and then let's delete all of this for now. So wave is going to be a new wave object, right? And it requires t, the string of text t here, and then it requires the x position and the y position. So let's do width divided by 2 and height divided by 2. And then we're going to display. All right, so the reason that it's up here is because I think we don't need this y, right? Because we already just set, right, we set the y position to be at 0. Okay, that's fine. So next, what we're going to do is that we're going to move the text. So how are we going to do that? We're going to write another method called move, and we're going to be moving the y position, right? So how about we just do this dot y plus equals to 1. And inside the wave class, we also need to call the move method. All right, so nothing surprising. The letters are just moving 1 pixel at a time. Okay, so before we move forward, I'm actually going to just change it to the letter A. All right, so let's go back to text.js. So now it is moving in a linear fashion, right? So the y position is changed by 1 pixel at a time. So how this really works is that, so if I print out frame count, which count the frames, the number of frames that's been playing, and also the y position. So you can see here that as time passes, the y position is the exact same amount as the time, right? So it's moving in a linear fashion. So basically what this means is if I were to write a function called linear and I have a parameter or an argument of x, then it should return the same value of x, right? So instead of writing it this way where this dot y is incremented by 1, what I can do is that I can set this dot y to be equals to this function here, this dot linear, and then I pass in an argument of, how about I set it as an amount, amt, and then I set this dot amt to be equals to 0. So the amount of time, right? And then if I do this, what I also need to do is that I need to increment this dot amt by 1 at a time. And this exactly is doing the same thing that it did previously. Now, instead of just moving it in a linear fashion, what we can do is that we can actually set these equations to be something else to make the transition a little bit more interesting. For example, instead of returning the same exact value, what if I return 2 times x? So it increases faster, right? It moves a little bit faster at 2 times the rate at which the time increases. But what if I do x times x? It moves much faster, right? It starts out slow and then it moves fast as the time increases. And this is exactly what easing functions does. This website, easings.net, has a bunch of interesting easing functions that you can use. For example, this one, ease in quad, it starts out slow and then it increases towards the end, which is what we just saw with a return function of x squared. Whereas this one, ease out quad, starts out fast and then slows down towards the end. And I have already put together all of these functions in an easing.js file, and all you need to do is just integrate that file into your program and make sure that you integrate it in the index.html file as well. All right, so let's look at how we can use this. So instead of doing it the way that we did here, where we increment the amount by 1 and it will keep increasing over time, right? What we want to do is that we want to actually limit the amount here between 0 and 1, but then you can multiply it by a range that you want afterwards. So I'm going to delete this, and then how about we use is in quad as an example. So is in quad, and we want to increment it up to 1, right? So how about we do a smaller increment of 0.1, and then as I said that I want to limit it between 0 and 1, so I'm going to say that if this dot amt is greater or equals to 1, then I'm going to reset this dot amt to 0. All right, but then if not, we're just going to keep incrementing it. But then this way, what's going to happen? It's only moving up and down up here, right? That is because the return value of y is only between 0 and 1. So what we want to do next is that we want to multiply it by a certain range. And the range that I want to multiply is, how about the height of the canvas. All right, let's slow it down a little bit. So can you see that transition? It starts out slow and then it speeds up towards the end. But there are actually a few things that I want to tweak. The first thing is actually I want to change from ease in quad function to ease in out quad to get a little bit of, can you see that? It slows down towards the end as well. So it only speeds up in the middle. All right, because it's ease in and it also ease out. The next thing that I want to do is that when the letter A reaches the bottom here, I actually want it to move back. So I want it to go back and forth. And what I can do is, how about I set a variable called this.dir for direction, set it at 1, and every time that it reaches one loop of animation, I'm going to reverse the direction by multiplying it by -1. And then we're going to multiply this.dir to this equation here. Where did it go? So how about I change the range to height divided by 2. So you can see that it comes down here, but then it goes back here and then it moves off the screen in a different direction. So the direction works, but we need to also change the starting point at which it starts to move backwards. So how about I set a variable called this dot y0, and I'm going to set it at 0. But every time that we change the direction, what I want to do is that I want to increment this by this dot direction times the increment here. So height divided by 2. And then we're going to add this dot y0 here. So how about I also print this dot y0. Oops, that's not what I want to do. Oh, we need to make sure that the change in the direction will come after we add this. All right, let's try it again. So it goes from 200, which is height divided by 2, back to 0, back to 200, back to 0. So this is what this equation does. And then we change the direction. All right, so instead of hard coding this, height divided by 2, I'm also going to set it as a variable. Let's call it this dot distance. And this dot distance will be equals to, let's set it as height for now. All right, so it's just going back and forth. Perfect. So now, what if we create a string of text, apple? Now, all the letters are clumped together. So now it's time to fix that. I don't mind that it starts at the same position, but what I want is that I want to change the distance at which it travels. So each of the letters will travel at a different distance based on where it is in the string. So what we're going to do is, instead of setting distance as a fixed variable here, we're going to also set it as a parameter here. And then inside the wave class, we're going to set distance, and distance is going to be how far each of the letter in the string travels, right? So first we're going to divide the height of the canvas evenly by the number of the string, the letters in the string. So this dot t array dot length, and then based on which letter it is in the string, in the array, it is going to travel by that much distance. So once we have this, we need to make sure that we put it inside this constructor function here. All right, let's try it. And as you can see here, the letter A doesn't move at all. And that is because when I equals to 0, then everything, the distance travel is 0. So we also want to add 1 here. All right, so now it starts moving at 0, right? And E, which is the last letter, moves at this distance here. So I want to tweak it a little bit. So I still want the letter E to move at a maximum distance of height, but I want the letter A to move a little bit further down. So what I can do is, instead of actually dividing the distance between each of the letter movement evenly based on the whole height of the canvas, I can reduce it to, let's do it by height divided by 2. And then I can make sure that the first one moves at least by height divided by 2 plus something else here. So if I do this, you can see that A is still moving a little bit further down. So if I print out distance, you can see that E moves down by the height, because right now the height is at 400 pixels, but A moves down by 240. All right, so you can tweak this variable here and then this variable here to however you want. All right, so next what we're gonna do is that instead of having just one string, let's make a bunch of these strings. So we need to basically just create a bunch of the wave objects. So I'm going to change this to an array, and then I'm going to create another variable called num, and num is going to be based on the width size. So width divided by size, And then we're going to use a for loop to go from I equals 0 to I less than num, I plus plus, and then we're going to create a bunch of wave objects and put it inside this waves array. So new wave, we're going to be using the same t string here. It's not going to be in the same x location at width divided by 2 now. So how about we create x to be equals to I times size, right? And then we're going to copy this for loop, and we're going to be calling the display function on all of these wave objects. All right, and because we did the text align to be based on center and center, what we also need to offset here is we need to add size divided by 2. All right, so now it's in the middle of the canvas. Perfect. Next, what we're going to do is that now everything is bouncing back and forth at the same location with the same movement. We want it to create that wavy movement, and what we can do is that instead of giving the amount value inside the move method inside the text class at 0, right? To have it begin at 0, we can change that based on which string it is, which wave it is. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to text.js. Let's create a parameter called AMT. So instead of this .amt equals to 0, we're going to set it to AMT. And then we're going to go to wave.js. We also need that AMT here, right? So we're going to pass this AMT inside this here, because this is where we create the text objects inside the wave class. And then now inside sketch, what we're going to do is that we're going to set AMT. And AMT is going to be based on the number of waves that we have, right? Which is this variable num here. But the value that we want is only going to be between 0 and 1. So first we want to divide the number 1 evenly by the number of waves that we have. And then we just multiply it by I. And then we just put AMT in here. And I think that should be it. Ta-da! All right. Okay, so next, how about we decrease the size to 10? And instead of the string being apple, why don't we do waves with a bunch of S's. All right, and that looks pretty interesting already, but let me show you the last part that just got me really excited when I first tried this, which is how about we go to easing.js file here, and I'm gonna try this easeinBounce function. So let's go to text.js. Then in here, instead of easeinQuad, we're going to do easeinBounce. And look at that. It looks like this string of text has a life in itself. So how about easeinOutBounce? And you should really just play around with the different easing functions that you can find online. Or you can even come up with your own and just create a bunch of these animated typography. And I think I'm just going to end this video here, but I think it gives you a lot to play around with. You can also add different colors to make it a little bit more interesting. And I really had fun with this one, and I hope that you do too. So give this one a try.